Now, there was an interesting column from psychiatrist Tanveer Ahmed in the Australian Financial Review today. He writes, "What happened during the election was an inversion of the trends that elected Donald Trump. Instead of working class men turning on the Democrat left, it was educated female professionals coordinating a coup upon a Conservative party." Now, three of the victors around the country have been medical doctors in this election. Monique Ryan, who defeated Josh Frydenberg and Kooyong, Sophie Scamps, who took out Jason Falinski and McKellar, and Labor's Michelle Ananda-Raja, who won Higgins from Katie Allen, who's also a doctor, as it happens. Tanveer joins me in the studio. Good to talk to you again, Tanveer. It's a fascinating column from you because people used to talk about doctors' wives. Well, here's now female doctors having a big impact in politics. You say that this is part of a broader social trend.
Yeah, look, I've seen this over probably a couple of decades, my entire time as a doctor. And it's very interesting. There is actually a big economic dimension, Chris. Doctors used to be this block. Think of the old days with the Australian Medical Association, these really hard nut conservatives. Doctors used to be a block, economic block of self-employed small businessmen. Now, over the last 20 years, that's shifted dramatically. One, there's heaps more women entering the profession. They outnumber blokes almost 2 to 1 in most medical schools. Partly they're doing better academically. But now they're far more likely to be in the public sector. They're more likely to be doing jobs where it's care-based, longer consultations and lower paid. And even in the private sector, there's been so much consolidation, be it private equity chains. A lot of old doctors have sold up, and even the private sector doctors are earning wages. So what I'm saying is, as it's become feminised, the economic nature of being a doctor has also shifted. So they're all wage earners. It's like they've gone from small businesses to left-wing public servants. That's been a big shift economically.
Now, and there's data backing this up. This is not your observations. There's data about doctors increasingly being employees rather than small business people.
That's right, absolutely.
And so what's the impact of this on politics? Why are we seeing female doctors going into politics? I mean, each individual is going to have their story, but what's the political trend?
I also this increasingly become a social justice edge within the medical profession. And you see that in a lot of the accreditation bodies, where they use words like oppressed. You know, even in my group of College of Psychiatrists, they've got a committee dedicated to climate anxiety. Right? So it's curious now. Look, they're entitled to channel and we saw that earlier with the role of refugees. There's a real social justice ideological edge kind of going through the medical profession, which is completely odds with its history. And I actually think this election has really showed an exclamation mark at a federal level over some trends that's happening in the professions, particularly medicine, law, to a lesser extent accounting and others, that's probably been going on for a decade or two.
You talk about climate change anxiety, though. These people have been creating that, not fixing it.
Well, you're right. On one level, there's a chant of an apocalypse, and then there's all this concern, our kids are suffering climate anxiety. I mean, geez, I wonder where that's come from.
It's fascinating, really, isn't it? But the thing is, I suppose the lesson for the major parties, because they've both suffered at this election, obviously the Coalition more, the Liberals more, but Labor's primary vote went backwards as well. The lesson surely is for them to get involved more in practical outcomes, focus on the practical things that they can do for voters and for our society, rather than getting caught up in all sorts of ideological debates.
Yeah, these big moral fervour things, you can never win that, and certainly the Liberal Party can win it. Another point I'd make, look, the undercurrent of politics is usually some sort of resentment, and I think the pandemic did play a big part in upping the resentment of a lot of professional women, because often they had to pull back hours, they had to do extra work at home, and evidence shows this. So I actually think there was a professional and personal resentment that built up through the pandemic.
That's interesting because that's gender-based, because the other argument would be that people in the professions had it easiest in the pandemic because they could generally still work from home so they didn't suffer from lockdown as badly.
They had it easier, certainly, but within their households and within their social groups, women arguably had it worse.
Now, you've been involved in politics in Western Sydney in the past. Just on the back of that Melissa McIntosh interview, what does the Liberal Party need to do to win back large swathes of Western Sydney?
Well, she spoke about it well, isn't it? I mean, you've got to be local, but you also got to stand for something. And I agree, this tension between, does it go more moderate? If you're just offering the same thing as... the left is full of parties. You've got Greens, you've got Labor. If you're offering the same thing, realistically, the parties, One Nation, United and Liberal Democrats, they polled almost 10%.
And a discussion about whether you're going left or right, progressive or moderate or conservative, and people are going to glaze over. Tell me actually what you're going to do. What policy are you going to change? What practically are you changing? Don't talk to me in philosophical terms.
But we do have to think harder. There is a growing gender split in politics.
Yeah.
So I think we have to be careful. Conservatives have to try harder not to look to... There's a male harshness and antipathy that's starting to be associated with conservatives that we have to learn to soften.
Gentle, masculine conservatives like us, like you and me. That's the answer. Thanks for joining us, Tanveer. Good to talk to you.
Pleasure, mate.
Tanveer Ahmed, columns in today's Australian Financial Review.